On a warm summer day, I drove across the city of Philadelphia to the neighborhood of Mount Airy. Driving up the driveway shared amongst 3 houses, it's very clear which is home to a native plant nursery.
That's another one of my favorites. To see like a sweat bee on there right now. That's a butterfly milkweed. Nice low growing. It's about the only orange blooming native plant that I know of.
You hear the frogs back there, or toads or whatever.
John Janick's nursery is situated alongside his house and is home to a meadow, woodland, and wetland habitat.
So this is the kind of a retention basin, wildlife pond. I call it a wildlife basin. I went and planted about 500 wetland species. You could hear the frogs. I have tons of, probably too many green frogs. The toads come in the spring. They'll do their mating call for like 3-4 days and nights straight. Big thing people always ask, like, what do you do about the mosquitoes? I have dragonflies, so they're the most efficient predator on Earth, and they eat throughout their adult and larval cycle mosquitoes. So even with a wet summer, we could sit out here at night and no issues.
So while neighbors toil away mowing lawns, John and his family can sit out and enjoy the native plants.
I mean, native plants are great. If you could add a water feature, I mean, that's where you'll really see, beyond the butterflies and the pollinators, like so many things that rely on that water source. Yeah, that's probably my favorite part of the property.
Hi, this is Gritty and Green, and I'm your host, Meredith Nutting. Today we're talking about native plants, what they are, where they came from, and why we gotta grow more. And that is why I visited John Janick at his house and nursery in Mount Airy. But before heading back there, I want to take you on a journey to a lifeless planet 1 billion years ago. So let's get growing. Here we are, 3.7 billion years ago. The landscape is rocky, with violent storms flashing against an orangey red sky made of a toxic mix of gases. Instead of the oxygen that most life now relies on, the atmosphere is thick and made up of carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, and water vapor, barely letting sunlight through. You may have heard the metaphor that if the history of Earth was scaled down to a 24-hour day, humans would have appeared in the fraction of a second before midnight. Based on this metaphorical clock, Earth existed for 5 hours until life even emerged. It's hard to imagine that this planet, with its violent storms and poisonous air, would one day hold all of the known life in the universe. But somehow, against the odds, a one-celled simple creature emerged. There's several hypotheses about how this happened. A primordial soup of organic molecules eventually organizing themselves into a cell? Or perhaps life caught a ride on a meteorite through the universe and seeded Earth. However it happened, the Earth now held life, the last universal common ancestor of all life on Earth that has ever existed. It's 5 a.m. on our metaphorical clock. The one cell replicated, copying its DNA, its blueprint, before splitting into 2. 2 became 4, 4 became 16, copying and splitting, and sometimes in the process a mutation would occur. A gene here or there changed. Sometimes that change didn't matter. Sometimes it was fatal. But even less frequently, that mutation of a gene would increase the offspring's ability to survive. That new mutated gene would get passed down to future generations. With enough mutations, the offspring became so different from each other that new species were created. This is evolution. About 2.7 billion years ago, cyanobacteria were the first to produce oxygen through photosynthesis. Using energy from the sun, they took carbon dioxide in from the atmosphere and returned oxygen in its place. Over billions of years, these tiny organisms changed the atmosphere from toxic to hospitable, like the one we have now. Well, maybe not now, but before we started pumping carbon dioxide and methane back into the atmosphere. As the atmosphere changed billions of years ago, more oxygen-producing organisms evolved. It was a slow process driven by random genomic events that took billions and billions of years. But life created an environment worth living in. And then, about 600 million years ago, came the Cambrian explosion. It lasted about 30 million years, which isn't too long geologically speaking, but the earliest ancestors of all our modern-day plants, animals, and fungi emerged during that time. With an atmosphere filled with oxygen and nitrogen, and the ozone layer holding it all in and stabilizing the global temperature, suddenly the life the Earth could sustain became more and more complicated at an unprecedented rate. The oceans were teeming with the first invertebrates, animals with no spines, like sea sponges and snails. And eventually backbones evolved, invertebrates like fish. Now it's 8 a.m. on our metaphorical clock, and it wasn't until 9:30 p.m. that plants started to root on land. Over millions of years, from mutations, the ones that increased survivability, animal species evolved that could thrive on land. It's 10 p.m. And now, instead of a barren, rocky landscape with unbreathable air, the Earth was a lush Eden filled with life living in the sea and on the land. This land was made of tectonic plates, shifting, pulling apart, and crashing into each other. 250 million years ago, the large landmass known as Pangaea started to break apart. It's about 11 p.m. on our metaphorical clock. The tectonic plates making up the one large continent started to drift, forming 7 continents that we have now. And in the process, each of these plates took the plants and animals that lived on the land with them. Species were separated into different populations by mountain ranges and oceans. As they reproduced isolated from each other, they evolved to survive in their new climate together with the plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria they traveled with on that tectonic plate. New species emerged, and others became extinct. It was the natural cycle of evolution. It is estimated that the Earth has seen at least 770 million, but maybe even billions of species. 99.9% of all of those species that ever existed on Earth since life began are extinct. Now we have about 8.7 million different species, but we're also in the midst of a 6th mass extinction. For reference, the 5th mass extinction was the dinosaurs, around 11:40 p.m. on the 24-hour clock. Experts estimate that the extinction rate that we're witnessing right now is between 1,000 and 10,000 times higher than the natural extinction rate. We're losing perhaps 1 or 3 or 17 species an hour. The exact amount is unclear, but even the estimate of 1 an hour is a lot. And the reason for all this loss, of course, is us, humans. We've changed the climate, digging up all those greenhouse gases life spent billions of years removing from the atmosphere. We've cleared habitat that life spent millions of years co-evolving. And we've introduced species in places that they have no right to be, either by carelessness or because they looked nice. In fact, about 37% of the 3,400 species of plant found in Pennsylvania are non-native. And the problem with these non-native plants is that they didn't evolve here, which can be a disadvantage, but oftentimes they have the upper hand. If they can survive and naturalize, reproduce on their own in a new environment, they're in a land with no predators, nothing to eat them or keep their populations in check. And if they reproduce aggressively, they'll just take over. Walk in many forests around the East Coast and you'll find an understory filled with introduced and now invasive species. Without native plants, native insects like caterpillars and bees can't survive. This mass extinction includes an insectageddon, a clever name someone came up with to describe the very serious matter that the planet's insects are disappearing. Swatting mosquitoes in your garden, it may not seem like it, But I remember as a child, some 30 years ago, driving on the back roads at night with a windshield smeared with smashed bug carcasses. This year, nothing, not a single one. Without insects, plants can't be pollinated and reproduce. Birds can't feed their hatchlings. Animals that feed on plants and insects die out. It's a whole cycle of ecosystem degradation. It took billions of years for life to create a habitable planet with species that co-evolved, creating complicated ecosystems of which we are a part of and quickly destroying. But there is a little thing we can do to help: plant native plants. Fortunately, native plants are becoming a bit of a trend, and for good reason. Plants living in the place they evolved require less water and chemicals to grow. They're easy. They also help sequester more carbon, reducing air pollution, and they can reduce flooding. And importantly, they feed our insects, leading to more biodiversity. Okay, great, you may be thinking, but what next? How do I figure out what to plant, where to plant, how to plant it, and where to get all these plants? Well, lucky for you, I got some answers from one of the only native plant nurseries in Philadelphia.
My name is John Janick. I am the owner and operator of Good Host Plants, a straight species native nursery in Mount Airy. Started it about 8 years ago at Front and West Erie. Had a retail space with a demo garden. Then the pandemic hit and I closed it down right when we got our new house in Mount Airy, where I had enough room to kind of do growing on the property.
John's journey into native plants started in 2010 by happenstance.
We had just moved into our last house, also in Mount Airy. We had like a little yard, so I couldn't wait to do some gardening. It was the first time I had a garden space in Philly. Even though I have a degree in biology, I knew nothing about the value of native species, so I was ready to head to Lowe's or Home Depot and fill up the trunk with a bunch of random flowers and shrubs and start getting into gardening. But I noticed some local forum that Audubon Society was doing Audubon at Home audits in Northwest Philly. So I said, I'm about to do my yard, let me sign up. And they got right back to me, sent about 7 or 8 people to come and meet me. They spent 2 hours there. It was that's why I do what I do today, because of that. If I didn't see that post on a forum, I would have went to Home Depot that day and brought back, boxwoods and things like that, and that would have been the end, the end of my native plant journey before it even started, most likely. I've just kind of been down the rabbit hole ever since.
John started experimenting, planting a variety of native species in his yard.
One of the first shrubs I planted was spice bush. I saw what the spice bush swallowtail caterpillar, looks like a little snake head. And I planted it. And that fall, I got spice bush swallowtail caterpillar. So it was wow, if you plant this stuff, it really works.
The birds noticed, and his yard was soon filled with birdsong. His neighbors also started noticing and asked him to plant in their yards too.
But the one thing I was finding out is that all the native plant sellers were an hour outside of the city. And I had a friend who had a commercial property with a half acre that wasn't being used. Said, why don't you use this space to start up?
Around 2015, John put in a 22 by 50 foot hoop house to start his native plant nursery. But growing plants for a nursery isn't the same as planting them in your yard.
It was a lot tougher than I anticipated, just growing plants in pots. They get dry really quick on a hot day, especially if they're in the hoop house under clear poly. There are a lot of soil pathogens and pests and things. So yeah, just so many things, just labeling things with a popsicle stick and permanent marker, coming back in the spring after watering for a year, it was gone. Now I didn't know what was in the pot. So wise word someone once told me is to grow plants, you have to kill plants, and I killed a lot of plants. Over the last 8-9 years, I just learned as much as I could from people who had the knowledge, and yeah, I really wanted. There was just there was a big gap in the city, like for native plants, and I just wanted to get people interested, and that's kind of been my mission.
A few years later, John went further down the rabbit hole and became a master naturalist.
They just had some amazing speakers and like really knowledgeable people.
He also did the Force of Nature program run by Natural Lands, a Pennsylvania-based nonprofit where John saw firsthand the issues native plants face in the wild forests.
We're right next to, a few blocks away from the Wissahickon, largest urban park system in the U.S., I think. And got this beautiful natural woods in the middle of the city. But once you take the red pill and start to know like what's a non-native invasive that overwhelms all the good native plants, you see how threatened like our big open spaces are. Places like Carpenter's Woods, like an important bird area, a lot of like old growth like oaks and things that support 400 plus species of caterpillars, which is why the birds come to feed their young, but you see the invasives everywhere.
The introduced species taking over our oldest forests have a majestic and unsuspected accomplice: white-tailed deer. It's estimated in Philadelphia that we have 50 to 60 deer per square mile in our parks. Forests can typically only support 8 to 10 deer per square mile. Without their main predators, wolves and cougars, both of which humans have pretty much eliminated on the East Coast, the deer population exploded. You may think, it's Bambi, how bad can it be? A forest with an overpopulation of deer is a forest that is dying. The deer prefer eating native plants they evolved with. With each bite, they clear space on the forest floor, giving way to introduced species ready to spread. Instead of a diverse understory, the forest becomes a non-native monoculture. It's a food desert for the animals that evolved there. Eventually, even the deer who are part of this destruction are starving themselves. An ecosystem out of balance isn't good for anyone, and our dying forests become eerily quiet.
The birds will disappear because there won't be the insects feeding on those trees that would otherwise be on the oaks that would draw them in there.
This is why many forests have invasive removal volunteer days.
We do like, an invasive removal event. We'd get like a little tiny patch and we did a lot of work there, but like you'd see like next year that patch would start coming up. There are so many invasives. They take over for a reason. They outcompete the native plants for like sunlight, water, you name it. They don't have many pests because they were brought here from like Europe and Asia. So they just take off and outcompete the other ones until they're gone.
The United States has been paying over $21 billion a year to control the ecological damage caused by invasive species. Clearing invasive plants from a forest isn't a one-and-done kind of operation. For example, the New York Restoration Project estimates that their staff spends 230 days a year manually removing invasive vines from the forests.
It's just like, I don't want to say a losing battle, but our public spaces and parks, like they're so hard to keep under control, but your yard, whether how small, even if you just have planters on like a roof deck, like that makes a difference. You plant it, you will get the pollinators. So I think it's super important people get into it on their own properties, no matter how big. I had a customer who didn't have any land, but had a deck and a roof deck. And he just collected just anywhere he could find them. Potters, pots, like Home Depot buckets, anything you could find, fill them with soil and plant. And like amazing, like what could grow in just a pot if you could water it. Poke drainage holes in the bottom, but all the butterflies and everything. So like even the tiniest space, like a few planters, like you could really make a difference with pollinators.
Studies have found that in areas where there are few plants and low biodiversity of pollinator insects, that small patches of native plants have a big impact. They can provide important stepping stones for refuge between areas with larger patches of native plants.
Right now, the monarch population is in like super decline over the past 30 to 50 years. When I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, I remember seeing monarchs everywhere, and the caterpillars, they're really distinctive. But now, I mean, I probably have a few hundred milkweed planted out there. I don't see monarchs until I just started seeing them about 2 weeks ago. So they're laying their eggs on the underside of the leaves. Those are the generation that will make the trip to Mexico. So like in that sense, even if you have an aster blooming, that could make a difference. The monarch comes there. It may have been running on empty, but it found that aster recharges with nectar, flies, makes it to the next stops. And a lot of the like specialist native like solitary bees. Could be a lot of flowers blooming, but they don't use those for nectar. So if you're even a small pot with like a certain type of plant that they're specialized on, like they'll find it and they'll use it and they'll keep it going, and they'll make a hole in a piece of dead wood nearby, and could get generations of that bee thanks to the plants that you're planting in a small space.
When you're planting only a few plants in a small space, you have to make choices on which ones are going to be most beneficial. Some plants host many insects, while others may be massively important to just one specialist species.
You could really grow anything. If I had to name a few just for someone, I just want to get into natives. I don't have time to research it, but I want to plant something that's good and hardy and bulletproof, like things like asters and goldenrods. Both support over 100 different types of caterpillars. Purple coneflower or black-eyed Susan or New England aster, smooth aster. It's really, really easy. A good combination that I'll plant is Joe Pye weed, Eutrochium. There's a big one, hollow stem Joe Pye weed that gets like 7 feet tall, but there are other shorter varieties. Those will attract all the big butterflies, the swallowtails and monarchs. And then I'll plant swamp milkweed next to that. So when you get the monarchs coming for the nectar, they have a place to lay their eggs where their caterpillars could eat on the milkweed. And swamp milkweed by itself is like a great butterfly attractor.
Creating a good pollinator habitat isn't just about planting one native plant. It's about providing food both for adults and larvae, water, and shelter.
I have the little blue stem. I'll see songbirds coming for the seed. You'd be surprised, but a lot of caterpillars can feed on a lot of the native grasses. A big one is that it provides like cover for wildlife, like dense cover. But I'd say like black-eyed Susan would give you the most bang for your buck. You're going to get like 6 months of really nice blooms starting this time of year. Butterflies love it. Skippers love it. Really easy to grow. Anything I grow, you can't go wrong. Because I'm a web developer by day, and it's kind of like my side passion project. Yeah, just not having to rely on sales too much. I can be like strict with my mission, which is to, for the most part, I grow straight species native to the mid-Atlantic. A lot of the time, most of the time, I'd say sourced from local ecoregions. Once in a while, I'll grow a cultivar.
Cultivar is a portmanteau of cultivated variety. The variety part of cultivar refers to the plants that evolve different traits in nature. Not quite a species, but different from other varieties of the same plant that evolve somewhere else. And then there's the cultivated part of cultivar. This is when those different traits are selected for not by nature, but by humans. So when John says that he plants straight species, it means that there was no human intervention in creating the genetics of the plants. The existence of native plant cultivars, or nativars as they're sometimes called, is a confusing obstacle for folks just wanting to help out pollinators. Not everything labeled native is in fact a plant you'd find in nature, let alone created by it.
If you got a tray of a cultivar, every plug would look exactly the same. Because with the straight species, especially like open pollinated straight species from the wind or pollinators, you get a tray of open pollinated straight species, say little blue stem, you're going to see different varying heights, different hues, like really diverse like color and everything like that. And it's not just the color, it's like, if you think about that, preserving that genetic diversity, if like a blight or a disease comes in, some of them are going to get knocked out, but a few of them may be resistant, and preserving that will allow like the species to continue, whereas if something comes in that affects a cultivar, like they're all genetically identical, it's going to take out all of them.
And sometimes native cultivars are just useless. The Mount Cuba Center in Delaware does trials on different cultivars, different colors of coneflowers, different heights of phlox, different shapes of rudbeckia, just to see if they're still desirable to pollinators. And oftentimes, height or color won't have a big effect, but flower shape will.
If it changes the shape, like you'll see like a coneflower, like they have them like a rainbow of colors, like cultivar. Some of them will have double flower heads. Like if you look at those trials, you see like when you dramatically alter the shape of like a flower, won't get visited by any pollinators. Like it looks great, but it doesn't provide the benefit like to wildlife or pollinators, just because they can't recognize it. So that's the big one. Like they look great, but a lot of times like this is native, but it's a cultivar. It's not really providing for like the pollinators. I'm not so much of a native extremist. If you get into natives and you want like this particular splash of color, you can't find it anywhere, like by all means like plant a cultivar if you have it mixed with other things. It's much better than planting something invasive like a butterfly bush. It's non-native, it's invasive, it's going to take over other things. So like, yeah, I mean, if you really like a cultivar, like by all means, go ahead.
Especially in the small places tucked in a wholly unnatural environment like a city, cultivars that create smaller versions of beautiful prairie natives allow us urban gardeners to plant manageable pollinator gardens.
If you're ready to get into this, I hope you like gardening because there's going to be a lot of weeding. Biggest thing I would say is small yard or something like that. Don't just plant among the weeds. Like take the time, pull up any of the invasive plants. I don't use herbicides or anything like that. I'm a big fan of smothering.
It's important to remember when you're planting food for insects not to use chemicals. You want your soil to be clean because the spaces between the plants in native gardens is a great untouched spot for ground nesting bees, particularly over winter.
So, especially this time of year, best time to plant because the days are shorter. You plant stuff now that we get more rain. You're not going to have to water it. We're not going to get a hot like heat wave drought. So this is the time to plant, like from late August through October, like best time to plant. Because when they get that winter under the ground, they could focus long after the tops of the plants die back until we get really, really hard frost. They're focusing on root growth. So that's going to come up like close to maturity in the spring, and like a wet spring or like late snow isn't going to do anything to that plant. It's been through a winter already. So plant in the fall, but if you're not ready, take the time. You won't regret it. Prepare your plot like for planting. The most important thing is just planting and experimenting with different plants, getting to know the plant. Take pictures of it so you could go back in your photos. I use Google Photos, so I could just search like blue flower May and like go through and look by each year, when does something bloom? So I learned bloom times, I learned heights. Yeah, there's a ton of resources online. You'd be surprised how few people knew like the importance of like just how much of an impact you can make by what you plant on your property. You know, there's a lot of things you want to change in the world, but like if you plant a native plant, that makes a difference. If you get into it, It's really fun. It's a great hobby. And get to know your plants, take pictures of them, use the online resources, ask questions. It's all there, and do it. It's easy. In the end, it's cheaper than mowing for 4 hours at a time, twice a week. And I just sit back and look at my flowers. So.
That was John Janick from Good Host Plants. You can find out more about his native plant nursery on his website, goodhostplants.com. So are you wondering what a host plant is and what makes it good? To find out, let's just explore the life of one of the most famous butterflies in North America, the monarch, Dinaus plexippus. Named for King William III of England, aka the Prince of Orange, the monarch butterfly is easily identified by its orange and black wings. There are 3 species of monarch butterflies worldwide and several subspecies. In 2022, the migratory monarch, Dinaus plexippus was declared endangered. The eastern population of this subspecies travels up to 3,000 miles from southern Canada down the east coast to the volcanic mountains in central Mexico, where they overwinter. In the spring, those monarchs that overwintered travel up through Texas. A new generation is born there, and those monarchs travel along the shore of the Gulf of Mexico and up the east coast to around Virginia, where they breed. A third generation finishes the migration up to New England and Canada. These first 3 generations only live 2 to 6 weeks. But the 4th generation, born up north, lives 9 months, long enough to migrate all the way back down to Mexico, survive through the winter, and travel back up to Texas to breed in the spring. The population of monarch butterflies migrating has dropped 80% in the last 20 years. Harsher winters have killed off more of the overwintering monarchs. Erratic weather has changed the bloom time of the plants that the monarchs rely on for nectar. And human development and pesticide use has reduced the amount of milkweed available for the monarchs to lay their eggs on. Milkweed and monarchs. These 2 species evolved so closely that monarchs can't live without milkweed. It's the only plant that can host the baby caterpillars. Lots of butterflies have specific host plants. One of the most obvious in our gardens is the black swallowtail butterfly that uses members of the Apiaceae family, including parsley, dill, and fennel, to raise their baby caterpillars. If you found your herb garden decimated seemingly overnight, you've become a nursery for our native black swallowtail butterflies. Unfortunately for the monarch, milkweed doesn't have a related plant we readily grow in our herb gardens. In fact, milkweed is toxic to a lot of birds and mammals, causing issues in the nervous system, kidneys, and muscles. Bad news for other animals like free-ranging livestock, but the monarchs have evolved to use this toxin to their advantage. Each female monarch lays 100 to 300 eggs in her life, if she can find a suitable nursery, or many. The University of Minnesota's Monarch Lab estimates that each caterpillar needs 1 mature milkweed plant. If she had her way, the mama monarch would lay 1 egg on the underside of 1 leaf of each milkweed plant. This egg sits hidden for 3 to 5 days, and then the caterpillar, or larva, emerges. A little gray creature with a black head about the length of a staple. Over 11 to 18 days, the tiny caterpillar eats the milkweed, ingesting the toxins and absorbing it into its body. Eating more and more milkweed, the caterpillar becomes toxic itself, a good deterrent to predatory vertebrates like birds. As it grows too large for its skin, it molts, casting off the old skin and displaying a new pattern. The time between these molts is called instars. In some butterfly species, these instars can look very different. Like in the black swallowtail, the first instar looks like a blob of bird poop, while the last instar is bright green with black stripes and orange spots. After the monarch caterpillars have grown about 100 times their original size and are in their 5th instar, they move into their next phase of life, the chrysalis. Sometimes people refer to the chrysalis as a cocoon, but they are actually different. Cocoons are typically made around the insect. Think mud or silk. They're soft and porous. A chrysalis is formed from the caterpillar's body and is hard. When a monarch caterpillar is ready to pupate, or form a chrysalis, it crawls away from the milkweed buffet, finds a branch, and attaches a little pad of silk to hang upside down from. The caterpillar doesn't form the chrysalis around itself. Much like the molting process where the old skin broke away, revealing the new skin, the chrysalis emerges when the caterpillar molts for the last time, and that skin hardens into a beautiful emerald ornament. Then the caterpillar digests itself, breaking its body down into cells and parts of cells, a goo ready to transform. Some of these cells are imaginal cells, set to become parts of the adult butterfly. These cells use the protein in the goo as energy to divide rapidly into wings, antennae, and legs, all the things that butterflies have that caterpillars don't. The most wild thing, to me at least, is that researchers have found that in the species they studied, the adult butterflies actually remember things from when they were caterpillars. So that goo inside the chrysalis is actually sentient in a way. After 8 to 14 days, the emerald chrysalis turns translucent, showing the monarch's new orange wings inside. The monarch starts to split the chrysalis open and within seconds emerges, stretching and expanding its wings and abdomen. And in about an hour, it takes its first flight. While its diet was severely limited to just milkweed when it was a caterpillar, the adult monarch feeds on nectar from lots of different flowers. Researchers from Cornell University have found that perhaps late-blooming flowers are more important to the migratory monarch's survival than milkweed. This is because a constant nectar source is vital when the adults are traveling back down to Mexico. So, to save the monarchs, we do need to plant milkweed, but that's not all. You want to create a native habitat, one stop to suit all of the monarch's needs. And the best part of doing this is that it helps more of our native pollinators and insects. To start, give them a snack with varieties of nectar-producing flowers: goldenrod, blazing star, asters, and coneflowers. Provide them with a nursery filled with host plants: milkweed for the monarchs, fennel for the black swallowtails, and violets for the fritillaries. Give them a room at the inn with shrubs or long grasses for butterflies to hunker down to get out of the rain. And of course, a watering hole. A shallow dish of water with pebbles providing a landing spot. Butterflies are cold-blooded and they need warmth to fly, so plant your garden in a sunny place and do not use fertilizers or pesticides. A butterfly garden is only doing its job when it's getting absolutely devastated by caterpillars and other insects eating it. You can find out more information about the exact species to plant for your garden on the Good Host Plants website, and there are innumerable resources online. I'll put a few of my favorites in the show notes. Your little butterfly garden may be just the oasis that a monarch needs to get it to its next stop along the 3,000-mile migration. And every monarch that makes it helps ensure the survival of a species for generations to come. Thanks so much for joining me on a journey of evolution and through an entire life cycle. And a special thanks to John Janick for inviting me to his home to share his wealth of knowledge about growing native plants. This is the final episode in this season of Gritty and Green. I hope you've learned a little something about how to grow a garden in a city of row homes and have been inspired to create more greenery around your home in the city. I'll be back next spring with a new season and perhaps popping back throughout the winter with special episodes, so stay subscribed. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey into the weeds, and a very warm special thanks to Lady Danny. Seriously, if you haven't found her online yet, please do. I've helped you out in the show notes. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please like, review, and share it. We only have a few more episodes this season, and I'd love to hear what you love, what you could leave behind, and what you want to learn more about. You can email me that and your garden questions at grittyandgreen@coolgoonproductions.com. Gritty and Green is presented by Green Philly in collaboration with Cool Goon Productions. It was written, directed, and edited by me, Meredith Nutting. Theme music by Kazuya. If you want more information about local sustainability, go to greenphl.com.